All right, welcome. Today, we are going to crack open the code behind human behavior. We're talking about the hidden forces that shape our decisions, our relationships, and yeah, even our entire societies. We're basically about to look at the operating system of human interaction itself, the psychology of influence. Seriously, think about it for a second. That time you bought something you totally didn't need, or maybe you agreed to something and kicked yourself later. Or just that weird gut feeling, that pull to say yes when every part of you wanted to say no. What was really going on there? Okay, so this is where it gets wild. The levers of influence, the little psychological triggers we're talking about, they're universal. The same basic principles that get you to buy a warranty in a store are the exact same ones an FBI negotiator uses to save lives. And on a much, much darker scale, they're the same tools pathological leaders use to control whole countries. But here's the thing. Before you can even begin to understand how other people might be influencing you, you have to get a handle on the hardware you're running on yourself. So the first step, the most important step, is to look in the mirror. So where do we even begin? Well, we start with the foundational work of Daniel Goleman. He put forward this really simple but profound idea. Before we can ever hope to navigate the world and other people, we first have to master the world inside our own heads. Right, so we all know about IQ, right? It's your raw intellectual horsepower. But Goleman's big argument is that while a high IQ might get you in the door, it's your EQ, your emotional intelligence, that really determines how far you're going to go. It's your skill at managing the emotional chaos of life. And a huge reason EQ is so critical is because of this concept right here, the amygdala hijacked. This is that split second when your emotional brain, the amygdala, just completely shoves your rational mind out of the way. Think about road rage or snapping at someone you love over something tiny. In that moment, your reason is literally offline and pure, raw emotion is driving the car. So how do you stop that hijacked from happening? Well, Goleman gives us a roadmap with these 5 pillars. And look, it's a journey that starts inside you, with just recognizing your own feelings and then learning to control them. Only after you do that can you move outward, harnessing your emotions for motivation, understanding others through empathy, and then finally, building real connections through social skills. This is the foundation for everything. Okay, so once you start to get a handle on your own mind, the next question is pretty obvious, right? How do you navigate the minds of other people? This is where the psychologist Robert Cialdini's work is absolutely essential. He spent years studying what he called compliance professionals, salespeople, advertisers, recruiters, to figure out the universal principles of persuasion. Now, these 6 principles, they aren't some kind of magic trick. They're powerful mental shortcuts that our brains evolved to use to make decisions faster. You can almost think of them as little bits of pre-programmed code. And because they so often run on autopilot, they make us incredibly vulnerable to influence. And as soon as you know these, I promise you will see them everywhere, just working away in the background. From that free sample that makes you feel like you owe them something, to the canned laughter on a sitcom that tells your brain, hey, this part's funny. Each one is like a subtle, invisible string of persuasion, tapping into our deepest instincts to trust, to conform, and to want what we can't have. So this is the really crucial point Cialdini makes. He's not teaching you a playbook for how to manipulate people. He's handing you the other team's playbooks so you can recognize the plays when they're being run on you. Awareness is the thing that turns you from a target into someone who knows what's going on. So you get your own emotions, you recognize the basic rules of persuasion, but what happens when the stakes are like life or death? Let's bring in Chris Voss. He was the FBI's lead international hostage negotiator. Voss's whole philosophy is a direct challenge to what we're all taught. He says that compromise, just splitting the difference, is often just a lazy escape. It leaves both sides unhappy. And you know what? There's a better way. And that better way is tactical empathy. And pay attention to the wording here. This isn't about agreeing with the other person. It's not even about liking them. It's about deeply, truly understanding their perspective, the emotions and the motivations that are driving them, so you can gain influence over what they do next. This right here brilliantly illustrates his key insight. See, most negotiators, they're always pushing for a yes. But Voss says yes is often totally meaningless. People just say it to make you go away. The real breakthrough, the golden moment in any negotiation, is when you can summarize the other side's position so perfectly that they just look at you and say, that's right.
That's when you know you have a real connection. That is when influence actually begins.
Okay, so tactical empathy is an incredible tool. It's powerful, but it kind of relies on the other person having emotions you can actually empathize with. So what happens when you're dealing with someone who has no empathy at all? And this is a really critical pivot. What do you do when the person across from you just doesn't play by the standard rules of emotion or ethics? When their entire operating system is built on self-interest, ego, and total control?
Well, in that scenario, the playbook has to change completely. You have to throw out all the emotional appeals, and you have to operate on their terms. That means focusing only on what's in it for them. It means using cold, hard facts as weapons and setting rigid boundaries that you never, ever let them cross. Every move, from projecting absolute confidence to documenting every single word, it's all defensive. This isn't about connection anymore. It's about protection.
Now, I want you to zoom all the way out with me. We've gone from the individual mind to one-on-one interactions to dealing with manipulators, but what happens when these same psychological dynamics scale up to the level of an entire society? And this brings us to the chilling work of Andrew Lobachevsky, a Polish psychologist who actually survived totalitarianism and then studied it from the inside. He came up with this term ponerology, which is basically a clinical, scientific attempt to understand how evil originates and spreads through a political system. And the final terrible result of this process is what he called a pathocracy. And this is crucial. It's not a government based on an ideology, like communism or fascism. It's a government run by individuals with clinical personality disorders, mostly psychopaths, who have managed to claw their way into positions of power. So how on earth does this actually happen? Lobachevsky laid out this creepy three-stage process he called ponerogenesis. First comes the infiltration, where pathological people quietly gain influence. Next, their destructive behavior becomes normalized, to the point where what was once shocking is now just normal. And finally, the system itself institutionalizes the sickness. It starts rewarding manipulation, it punishes empathy, and it completely flips the moral fabric of a society upside down. So let's bring this all together for a second. What we've built here is basically a complete toolkit for psychological awareness. It starts with mastering yourself. Then you learn to spot the universal triggers in other people. You learn how to use empathy as a tool, but also when you have to switch to a defensive playbook. And finally, you understand how these exact same individual patterns can play out on the world stage. Which really leaves us with one last crucial question to think about. Now that you've seen the playbook, from the tiniest personal interaction all the way up to the grand scale of history, who or what is writing the rules in your life? And what are you going to do about it?